Welcome to Don't Fear the Weight podcast with your host Vicky Masita, bringing together science and personal experience.
Hi guys, and welcome to the next episode of Don't Fear the Weight podcast. I, as always, am your host Vicky Masita, and today I have got a really extra special guest for you. I'm really excited about this one. I've been following his work and listening to him on a number of occasions, and I just absolutely love the hashtag no bullshit approach that he uses. So today on the podcast, I have Broderick Chavez. Hello, sir. How are you?
Vicky, thank you for having me. I am well. Hello to all your listeners.
Great. I'm very glad to have you here. So just in case people don't know who you are you quite happy just to give us a little bit of a background about who you are, what you're all about, and why you are on this podcast with me today?
Sure. Well, in reverse order, I'm not entirely sure. And who I am is, again, my name is Broderick Chavez. I am 45 years old, and I have been involved in either the competitive or coaching aspect of bodybuilding and speed strength sports since, 1981.
Wow.
I literally began training in a commercial gym when I was 10 years old. Won my first national powerlifting championship at 13.
Wow.
Coached my first athlete before I was out of high school. And, just collected a BS in biology, a minor in chemistry. And I've coached athletes in probably every demographic you could dream of. Fitness and figure, female bodybuilding, male bodybuilding, all manner of powerlifting, strongman, throwing sports, a lot of college track and field athletes, a few athletes that have even gone to the Olympic arena. Let's see, just that sort of thing. Things I don't do. Let's cover that real quick.
Okay.
I don't do anything outside of the world of strength and diet and nutrition. I probably clinically have some sort of serious personality flaw, and I am just a very ineffective human being when it comes to anything that I'm not immediately knowledgeable on. I mentioned off air, I literally can't purchase a cup of coffee without some sort of horrible interpersonal train wreck. So for your listeners, if I say anything really awkward or strange, it's only because I'm defective, not because I have any sort of problem with you or listeners or women, because I suspect most of your listeners probably, or at least not most, but maybe a higher percentage than most, being possibly the only female host I know of at the moment. So there I am. I'm a strength and conditioning coach of sorts. And one that comes with a lot of baggage in terms of interpersonal communication. So please bear with me.
Fantastic. And you're also known as the evil genius. Is that right?
I am to the point where I actually took that as my company moniker. I own and operate Evil Genius Sports Performance. So yeah, that came on very early. I think I was labeled with that by actually somebody who should be more famous than they are. A man named Tom Dieters, who used to be the editor of Muscle and Fitness in the 80s.
Oh, right, cool.
Actually labeled me that when I was 15 or 16 years old, and it stuck, and it's my company name. So, yeah.
Brilliant. I love it. Well, I'm very excited to have the evil genius here on with me today. So we're going to get right into the subject. So a lot of the listeners have been hearing of you or about you and understand that you are a problem solver. And that's the reason why we want to ask some questions that have been asked quite a lot in this field, especially recently. And the first one is in regards to recovery. Now, if we can cover this in the strength and performance side of things as well as the bodybuilding side of things, because I've heard a lot recently, and my God, it drives me nuts about saying, I am so overtrained and don't do this, don't deadlift more than 3 times a week because you're going to fry your CNS, you're going to be overtrained and you're not going to recover. So let's get your point of view on overtraining versus under eating, or are they one of the same thing?
That's really a popular subject, and it's actually a subject like most in the world, in the realm of biology, that you cannot separate out and just say, that's this or that or some other thing, because every time you pull the lens back, there's another layer. So there's deadlifting, and deadlifting has a certain cost in terms of energy consumption, damage to the muscle fibers and all that stuff that you learn about that generates growth. But then if you move the lens back, there's also the workout before and after it, and you move the lens back, and then there's the week before and after it, and then you move the lens back further, and there's what direction is your nutritional status? Are you dieting, in terms of gaining mass? Are you dieting in terms of, hyper or hypocaloric? You keep moving the lens back, and then at some point you can even get the lens back to the point where you could say, well, what is my immune system doing? Did I come in contact with somebody that had the flu? Am I fighting that? So every time you move the lens back, there's an additional layer. It's a lot like I liken or analogize often to economy. It's very much, recovery is very much like economy. There's your personal economy. Okay, don't be an asshole and spend more money than you have. But then there's also the conditions of get unexpected bills. They just literally aren't on your budget. You didn't know your tire was going to blow out and you're going to need new wheels, or you didn't know that lightning was going to strike your house, or whatever. And so there's always vectors that you're not aware of. So every time you move the lens back, it's bigger than you thought it was. So to say it's this or it's that is not fair. I know that you had Dr. Mike Israetel on, who's a good friend of mine and really probably right now the world's foremost expert on this subject. And really the big thing, and I know he already was on your show, and I'm ashamed to say I didn't listen to it, but what I suspect he said, whether he said it in plain enough English, because he can be a bit of a geek and sometimes not be as blunt as he ought to be, what he probably said in this giant dissertation that he gave, or that I suspect he gave, is regardless of what is or isn't overtraining, your best bet is to always undertrain slightly.
Yeah. Simply
because, just like budget, if you always spend a little less money than you intended to, strangely, you always have some fucking money left over. Yeah. It's strange, but that's how it works. So regardless of what is or isn't overtraining, the sensible approach is train enough to generate your desired result or your response, or in my world, that would be stimulus. Train enough to generate the necessary stimulus, but always intentionally undertrain to your abilities, leaving a margin that you can then spend the next time and the next time and so on. That's essentially it. Now, you did say one thing that I will take issue with, and not with you, but just in general. Yeah. People love to use the remark, it's my CNS, it's my central nervous system. That's just fucking stupid. Yeah. Of all the things that's going to overtrain, it's your brain and spinal column. That's what's going to overtrain. That's just people that don't know the little, the leg bones connected to the arm bone, what a little song, because that's not what's getting taxed here. When you deadlift, it's the muscles of your low back, it's it's your hamstrings, possibly even your endocrine system might get overtaxed. But the idea that your nervous system somehow, if you actually overtaxed your nervous system, you would have like Bell's palsy or something. I don't know what would actually happen, but it would be very bad. Like that's like, into the realms of Parkinson's and ALS. And is it possible to overtrain your nervous system? Yes, it is. But are the people you're talking about doing it? Absolutely not. That's just goofiness. Yeah. They just make that up. They're repeating something that somebody really stupid, like Dave Palumbo or somebody said, and they're probably Louis Simmons probably heard that word somewhere and thought it was neat initials. You see that? Jumping around. They don't know what the hell that means. They don't understand the anatomy chart. So anyway, I don't know if I answered your question, but that's what I have to say on the subject.
No, that's cool. That's cool. Okay, so just switching over slightly then, what about the subject about undereating for you performance-wise? Now, I know that a lot of women, women in general, they are a bloody nightmare for it. They don't like eating, but then they want to squat. And then if you take a little bit of food away from them because they want to get lean, they still want to squat, but then they can't squat because they don't want to eat. So what about in realms of undereating versus your recovery Can you undereat so you don't recover?
Well, of course. Again, going back to the concept of analogy, eating is your income and training is your expenditure. So obviously, if your income goes down, there's going to be a problem with your spending. That's really shouldn't be complicated beyond anyone's ability to intellectualize. So obviously, as you eat less, your recovery threshold comes down commensurately. Get paid less, spending goes down, get paid more, your spending can go up. Pretty straightforward. Now, I will say this, and I typically don't even mention these sorts of things because most people either don't believe you or don't care, but just by goofy luck, historically, most of my training partners have been female, and 3 of them, and I won't necessarily say that I'm taking credit for this, but 3 of the women that I have trained with have gone on to be professional bodybuilders, actual IFBB pros. So I have an enormous amount of experience, probably more than any of the other gurus running about prattling on. I have an enormous amount of experience, women specific, in terms of bodybuilding.
Okay.
So having said that, I will say that what separates, in my mind, the successful women in bodybuilding and in pretty much all other strength sports is that they grasp the relationship between 2 major things, having muscle and getting lean. Okay. It is impossible to get lean unless you have and retain muscle. And in that same equation, the more muscle you have and retain, the easier it is to get lean. We can talk more on that in a moment, but that's the relationship. And then secondly, they grasp the concept that training, possibly drugs, and food are required to retain the aforementioned muscle. So you have to have these things to get this thing, and this thing is the thing that determines your success. Right. So that typically becomes why women that are successful become successful. If they understand that they're not training to get lean or they're not training to get strong, they're training to get and maintain muscle and then teach the muscle to do whatever it is they're trying to do, whether that's look really great in a bikini or squat 500 pounds. It all comes down to the thing you can manipulate biologically in wholesale is your muscle, nothing else. You can't change the way your bones are shaped. You can't change, your height or any of that goofy shit. The only thing you really have control over is muscle, and then the variables in muscle are basically, food, training, and drugs. And that's pretty much it. That's all you got. So that seems to be the intellectual understanding or realization that leads to success in women's strength sports and bodybuilding. I kind of tend to separate them, but in this case, they are one. But that to me is what separates that. So I don't know if that helps your answer any, but definitely you can undereat. Simply, if you underpay, you can't pay your bills. You're that sort of thing. But in the same context, it's very easy to get it tied up in I have to eat like an asshole because I'm trying to gain muscle, and that leads to failure in a different realm.
Definitely. So I like that concept that you were saying that you basically have control over your muscle. Now, we did have a little chat previously about what we wanted to talk about, and one of those was actually designing your designer body by actually shaping a muscle. Now, let's get into the realm of that. So say, for example, one of my weak points, personally speaking, was my glutes, because I got extremely lean and my glutes looked very square. So when I was on stage previously, so I was told that I needed to kind of lift my backside a little bit more. And by doing that, I should be doing things like 100 lunges or kickbacks or something along those lines in order to shape the muscle. Now, is shaping a muscle actually viable? Can you actually do that and say, can you design your own designer butt, for example, or design your own designer pecs or that kind of thing?
Well, the answer to that is you need to have, and I say you as in whoever's listening to this, needs to have a better understanding of what a muscle is and how a muscle works. And also understand that, quote, the word a muscle is typically in reference to a group of muscles that function more or less in unison. For instance, something that I chastise people regularly for, and I don't think they appreciate it, but it's because I have no filter and things just leap out of my face. And one is people talk. The noise comes out of the hole in the front of their face, and they don't actually understand what those noises mean. Words have meaning, particularly in science. If you understand a rudimentary Latin and rudimentary science, somebody could say a word and you probably grasp what it is, even if you don't know shit about that subject. It's just the way it works, because the language of science is Latin and things are named relatively specific. The name of the honeybee that everyone's so worried about going extinct in North America is a great example that I use all the time. The name of that in Latin is Avis africanus, okay? 2 words. If you're even mildly retarded, you could still kind of go, Avis, that's something. Turns out that's a bee. Africanus, Africa, African honeybee. That's the name of the thing. And without knowing anything about honeybees, you can get grasp that's a honeybee that came from Africa. And that's how you start the conversation. Well, why are we talking about it in North America? Maybe it doesn't belong here. That's a whole separate subject. But the point is that language has meaning, particularly in science. So when we talk about the muscle of the arm, I'm going to use this example instead of your butt for 2 reasons. I'm not incredibly familiar with your butt, and I probably shouldn't talk about it. So we'll go with this one. This is a biceps.
Yeah.
Bi, Latin, 2. Ceps, you may not know, but you could look it up quick enough, means heads. This is a 2-headed muscle. You're literally talking about 2 muscles. So when you squeeze your arm, it has a given look, but that's 2 pieces. Now, each piece independently, you literally cannot change. It's like taking a piece of rope and putting it on a board and stapling it here and stapling it here. That can't change. You can't move the insertion or origin point. And by and large, the fibers are what they are. However, because there's 2 of them, through clever training and clever selection of exercise, you might be able to accentuate or not accentuate a given head of the muscle. Now, you didn't change each individual muscle, but when you raise your arm, it may appear differently because of the difference in the 2 heads. One is longer and flatter, one is more peaked. So instead of this, you might have this or something like that. So you can change the aesthetic or artistic appearance of something without actually changing it.
Right. Okay.
So there is, the answer technically is no, you can't change a muscle, but you can very much change the appearance of a group of muscles or a multi-headed muscle. For instance, the quadricep is now 4 heads. So you've got 4 different variables in which to fiddle with. Something I actually spoke on this subject when I was very young, probably 14 or 15 years old, with the great bodybuilder Tom Platz, and the subject of changing a muscle. And he said, he says, you can't change origins, you can't change insertions, you can't change a lot of things. He said, however, he said, if I had spent my entire life doing wide stance duck squats instead of the squats that I did, he said, I guarantee you my legs would look different. He said, did I change the muscles? No. He said, but I built them in a different order, and therefore I would have a different appearance. My physique would be different. So your body is dynamic and malleable, especially from an aesthetic point of view, but not in a technical, I changed a muscle. No. So you have to be very careful on what you're asking and what you're answering. Yeah,
definitely. I get it. So talking about the bicep then, there's a lot of these people who are going on saying they want a better bicep peak. Now, you said that through clever training, you can get a better bicep peak. So what would you say?
No, I didn't. Let me be extra clear. I didn't say you could get a better peak. I said that the head that's responsible for the peak, you could train more and make bigger. Now, would it, for instance, like a curve on a graph, if your bicep is shaped like this, in a bigger version, it's just going to be a bigger version of that same curve. You're not going to take a long, flat, genetically flat bicep and suddenly make it, stick up insanely like the cartoon where they whack you on the head, you get the big, big lump. That's not going to happen. But you can accentuate the head responsible for the peak, which happens to be the short head. You could do that. For instance, the bicep is designed in such a way that both heads attach at the same place below the elbow on your forearm. Okay. Then one of them comes up the arm and attaches to the arm bone, kind of under your shoulder here.
Okay.
The other one goes from below the elbow all the way up above the arm bone and connects to the shoulder.
Okay.
Okay. So the one that connects above the shoulder only really truly activates in a very stretched position. For instance, if you did an inclined dumbbell curl where your elbows go behind your body, that would be stretching that more, and therefore that would be the predominant prime mover.
Yeah.
Whereas if you elevated your elbow, the head crossing the shoulder is not stretched at all. As a matter of fact, it's the antithesis of stretched. So now when you curl, all of the motion, all of the flexion would be instigated by the short head of the bicep. Okay. So by training with an elevated elbow, you would be accentuating the head of the muscle responsible for the peak. So you have that ability to manipulate, and that's again, it's only a two-headed muscle, so it's a very simple example. There are complicated examples, like the chest is very complicated. The upper back is very, very complicated, but in its most simplistic form, that there is variability based on exercise selection. Unfortunately, this requires, and now I'm going to talk bodybuilding speak. This requires two things. One, an actual understanding of anatomy and physiology, which most people lack, and unfortunately, most quasi-experts lack. So there's a series of breakdowns in the communication line. And then lastly, an actual understanding of what is possible and what is needed. I've seen so many people address their physique and either ask me, how do I accomplish it? And whatever they say afterward is physically impossible. Yeah. Or what they ask me for, I look at it and I go, well, that's just going to make a bad physique worse. Like, you have to have the artistic understanding of what you want to do, and then the scientific understanding of whether or not that's even fucking possible. And unfortunately, that requires a real expert, and sadly, we're really short on those.
Yeah. And why do you think that is? Because this is a big subject as well, isn't it? A lot of PTs now are getting what I call the cereal box qualifications, because they literally,
absolutely,
they find it at the bottom of a cereal box, and then unfortunately we have some really, really bad or unqualified or really lacking of knowledge PTs and coaches out there who are literally taking bodybuilders' lives into their hands and doing it. So why do you think that is nowadays?
Well, it's funny you say that, because you connotate that with the nowadays, and I'm going to mention that I'm not incredibly old. I'm 45, but I've been doing this an incredibly long time. I've been doing this, literally 35 years. I've been involved in the business aspect of it 25 years. And I can tell you with an absolute straight face that this is not a new phenomenon. The speed and magnitude is greater because of social media and instantaneous communication, but the concept is not new. I'm going to generalize a really complicated subject, which is really not fair to the deep sociological roots of this. But in general, the problem is the consumer base, the people looking for information, are not able to differentiate. They lack such fundamental understanding of science that they're not able to differentiate gifts from effort.
Right.
And that is, you see a thin, attractive, female with high breasts and a round butt, and you go, oh, I need to talk to her. I want to look like her. And you don't realize that she's a bobblehead. She was just born that way. She doesn't have any control over that. As a matter of fact, most of the shit she's done in the gym is probably more negative than positive. But she looks the way people want, and therefore, another example, or the other example is, and I don't care if I besmirch him because I just don't give a fuck. For instance, Ronnie Coleman. He's as smart as a parsnip. There's nothing in his head. He is hollow. Other people, very, very clever, intelligent people, told him what to do. So now, young kids run up, oh God, Ronnie Coleman, what do I do to grow this or that? and whatever comes out of his head is nonsense. Because he doesn't know. His IQ is 70. He knows nothing. So that, I think, is what precipitates the problem, is people are unable to separate success from actual knowledge, because you can be dumb as a stick and unfortunately be very, very successful. And there is the problem. And then when you have social media putting that out instantly to 10 times more people than it used to, the problem is a runaway train. But I think it's the same problem it's always been. I mean, by and large, Arnold was an exceptional bodybuilder. But if I want to talk science of bodybuilding, I'm not calling Arnold. He's a great, I've met him. He's a great person. He's a wonderful person. But that's kind of my point, is he was very, very successful. But I don't think he was, a PhD caliber, physiologist.
No.
So that's kind of my point. I don't know if that helps. And more importantly, I wouldn't even begin to suggest how to solve such a problem.
No.
I don't have a clue, but I think that's the root of the problem.
Yeah, definitely. I always associate it with like a white coat thing. I always remember, and I bring this analogy into it, when my husband is a PhD qualified person, but he isn't a doctor. He's a doctor in the sense of the word with a piece of paper. However, when I was giving birth to his son and he introduced himself as Dr. Masita, I said, would you stop saying that, because it doesn't have the same meaning here in the hospital? Because obviously then they were starting to talk medical to him, and it just wasn't right. But it's that kind of thing, isn't it? You see a big guy in the gym with the big muscles and a big chest and a big back, and then they say, okay, I'll go to him because he obviously knows what he's talking about. When, like you said, he opens his mouth and then a box of frogs comes out, rather than scientific evidence. And that's what I think one of the biggest problems is. Now, going on to that, actually, speaking about boxes of frogs coming out of your mouth, one of the biggest arguments that is still going on to this day, and I actually heard a really interesting podcast about it by one of my good friends, AJ. He discussed fasted cardio versus fed cardio. Now, I know you're obviously giggling there because you know exactly what I'm going to say. What is the difference? We obviously know that doing fasted cardio is not going to burn muscle, because you're not going to be doing fasted cardio for the sake of a marathon, for example. But realistically, is it better? Is it worse? What would you advise when somebody is in a cut, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, let's start with what I would advise, because that's a fair place to start. What I would advise is put all of that nonsense out of your mind and actually design your program. And I consider this in all programming, from weight training to cardio to nutrition, is what does your schedule allow? What are you actually going to be able to do? Because I don't care when or what is perfect. If you can't do it, it's fucking meaningless. So bring to me a relative understanding of your day plan, and then we will insert it at the most advantageous time possible. That's how I would do it. I wouldn't worry about some goofy biological concept that most people can't actually understand anyway. They're trying to tell you about gluconeogenesis and fatty acid oxidation, and chances are they can't spell any of those words. They have no idea what it means. It's nonsense. The time that you are most able and effective at doing it is by far the best time to do it.
Yeah.
End of story. That's the answer. There is no other answer. Now, if you want to talk, you want to be a fly on the wall, listen to Lyle McDonald and I talk about the nuances of fatty acid oxidation at varying times during the day, which I am ashamed to say we've had that conversation 35 times. You would hear things like, fasted cardio has been shown repeatedly to be slightly superior in terms of burning, and I'm going to be very specific about my wording, energy, not necessarily fat, but burning energy. However, it has also been shown to put a greater depletion on the free amino acid pool, meaning if it's not catabolic, it's by far less anabolic or less anabolically potentiating. So what if absolutely burning every last molecule of fat is your highest priority? It might be 2% better to do it fasted. But if retaining muscle mass is your absolute highest priority, doing it fasted would probably be your worst option. But the reality is, in the big picture, the difference between them is so small, it gets lost in the wash. It really doesn't matter to anyone, especially in a world where 85 or 90% of the people having this discussion are taking performance-enhancing drugs, which absolutely negate it to zero.
Right.
Under the influence of drugs, it matters not. You can do cardio in the middle of the night, you can get up in the middle of the night and do it. It doesn't matter. It has nothing to do with nothing because you've completely blocked catabolism to any measurable amount, and so it doesn't matter. Just like the concept of doing cardio before or after your weight training. Studies have repeatedly shown that it does have a difference, except when you're taking drugs, and then it doesn't matter at all. Right. So, again, it's a matter of context, and that's really all it comes down to. But most of the time, and this is something, and it's not necessarily germane to what you asked me specifically, but I think maybe your listeners are garnering this, is stop dwelling on unimportant details that you really don't understand anyway, and focus on the big things that you actually can affect. Like, do I actually have time to perform an hour of cardio? That's probably way more important than when you're going to do it.
Yeah.
Do I or do I not have the ability to prepare a week's worth of food? That's probably way more important than when you do it or even when you eat it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Top down, deal with the big stuff, and then get smaller and smaller and smaller. And if you have your life running like such a top that you want to pay me $100 an hour to fine-tune little teeny things that other people wouldn't even think of, that's great. And people actually do that. But they have their life in order to the point where they can hand me a piece of paper and say, at exactly 11:57 on Wednesday, I will be standing in front of the treadmill. What do I do? Okay, now you've asked me a real fucking question. But this vague, should I do it fast? Shut up. Just go away. I don't even want to talk about it.
Brilliant. I love that. So I just want to come back to that one thing that you did actually say about having cardio pre and post workouts and that kind of thing, because I really like that. I'm a natural bodybuilder and a lot of my listeners are natural as well. So if we can look at it from a natural bodybuilder's point of view, what is it detrimental to do, say, half an hour to 40 minutes of list cardio straight after a workout, like say a heavy leg day or something?
Well, it's a matter of what are you detrimenting. It always comes down to context. Everything's detrimental to something, but also everything is rather beneficial to something.
Yeah.
So before you even talk about, and Mike Israetel would immediately jump in and say, doing cardio after your weight training downregulates your protein synthesis, and he'll go on and on about all this very clever biochemistry, because that's who he is, and that's the filter he looks through. I would look at it entirely different. I would look at it as available energy.
Okay. Doing
cardio before you weight train is going to consume a portion of that budget we've talked about. So if you get on a treadmill and spend 25% of your budget, guess how much you have left for weight training?
Yeah, 75.
Yes, less. It's pretty straightforward. Now, but the other side of that coin is exactly the same. If you weight train and spend whatever portion of your budget, you only have the remainder left for cardio, and that's it. That's the answer. You can't change that answer. So it's before you even talk about complicated biochemistry and protein signaling and mTOR and all these things that people will immediately blather on about, you have to understand before anything, it's a hierarchy of where is it most beneficial or advantageous for you to spend your time and energy. If you are overly muscular and a little fat, probably doing it first is beneficial because getting lean is more important to you than getting big. Yeah. If you're a skinny stick, weight training is obviously going to be more important. So it's simply before anything, start at the highest level of conception and what is most necessary or most relevant, and then work your way down from there. So yes, it does matter. And again, the matter is small. We're talking about percentage points of difference, but they are there. And those percentage points possibly separate first, second, and third in a contest. Okay. But to the vast majority of the people listening, it's as simple as, do I want muscle or do I want fat loss? Which is most important? Put it in that order, go about your day. Every 2 or 3 months, reevaluate your life and maybe make a change, maybe not. But that's as simple as it is.
Okay.
Again, that's another very real problem that bodybuilders bring to the fitness world is most bodybuilders have entirely different needs and priorities than the people listening to them.
Mm.
Some, middle-aged housewife that just wants to look decent at the beach really has nothing in common with a professional bodybuilder on any level. Different genetics, different lifestyles, different incomes. There's just nothing similar. Same thing with the house dad that just wants to not look a fool when he takes his shirt off mowing the lawn. What's he have in common with Ronnie Coleman or Jay Cutler or any of these names that you could pull up at? Nothing. So you have to start at some point thinking for yourself and thinking very generally, just very, very general. Just and I think that probably would solve half of the problems people face.
Yeah, I think a lot of that as well, with you saying that, say, having nothing in common with these big bodybuilders like Ronnie Coleman and Jay Cutler and things. You see the websites like bodybuilding.com and people who do just want to get a little bit better, to look better mowing the lawn with their shirt off, for example. They go on and do the Jay Cutler 9-week mass protocol, and then suddenly realize why they can't do it. And it's because they're trying to be Jay Cutler, who's, I don't even know what the guy does because I've never actually had a look at his programming. But this is what people do. And housewives who have had babies, they go and have a look on the bodybuilding.com and say, like, this person's 9-week post-baby thing, and then wonder why they end up injuring themselves because they don't know about recovery after C-sections. So what's your opinion on that following...
Well, yeah, and it's even more farther reaching than that. Is most people, especially in sports and arts, wind up doing what they do because they have aptitude.
Right.
Okay. You very seldom find a world-class artist, somebody that can paint beautiful portraits that started out with no talent. You don't find the tone-deaf guy that suddenly cuts an album and gets famous in music. You typically go into something that you have aptitude for.
Yeah.
So what you've got is people with really, really high aptitudes trying to teach people that are bereft of aptitude. Mm. That's why they are who they are. They don't have aptitude for athletics. That's why they're fat in the middle. That's why they have a flat ass and a caved-in chest. It's because they never had an aptitude for athleticism and never took up sports. Mm. So you've got the very elite teaching the absolute unelite, and it doesn't work. Mm. It's really as simple as that. Occasionally you find one of these people, they actually do have aptitude, but they just never exploited it, and they're the sudden runaway success. But in general, they're separated for a reason. It's because they're, relatively speaking, different people. It's just really that easy.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, awesome. So now that we've covered a good basis about training, let's go on to a bit of a nutritional side of things as well. One of the things that I've always been interested in, is metabolizing different macronutrients in different ways. So now, one of the things that comes to my attention quite a lot is people say to me, I work better on fats than I do carbs. Yeah, you know what I mean? So
yeah, I hear that a lot, and that usually either comes out of somebody that listens to Dave Palumbo or a woman, and typically they're the same thing. It is by far and away the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Now, keep in mind, I'm educated in the ways of metabolism and actual, biology.
Yeah.
I don't even know how to broach this subject because it's something that I literally just typically refuse to talk about. Wow, you're taxing my abilities. There's multiple vectors here. There's multiple problems. One, most of the time when you hear someone say that, their general physiology and metabolism, which we'll go back to that in a moment, are so fucked up from doing really dumb shit for so long that they may actually be duped into believing what they're saying, but it's not reality. It's just a consequence of really horrible behavior over time.
Okay.
But secondly, I want to go back to the word metabolism. You hear all sorts of people blathering on, and the word metabolism flies out of their face.
Mm.
I'm pretty confident most of those people have not taken the time to look up that word and know what it means. This is something I often start conversations with when people come to me, and it's typically a woman or someone very young. And they, oh, well, my metabolism's, and then it's very fast or very slow or very broken or whatever the word, whatever description they put after it.
Yeah.
And I say to them, I realize you're not a biologist. I realize you're not a chemist or a medical doctor, but can you stick out your index finger and point to your feet? And invariably they get it right. Oh yeah, finger and feet, they got it. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, can you touch your ear? And they, okay, go. So you basically know where your stuff is. Your heart is here, your lungs are in the middle. You can do this. All right, now take out your index finger. Now point to your metabolism. And they just kind of look at you like a fucking idiot.
Yeah.
And I say, well, so you're using a word that is a mystery to you. You don't know what it is or where it is. That's a problem. Right there. Let's pause and address that. You have a mysterious ailment with a mysterious body part you can't find. We need to stop. Okay? So, from that moment on, I've either made them so mad they leave the room or I have their fucking attention. That's usually where we're at this point in the conversation.
Okay.
So the ones that hang around, I then say, your metabolism is a net of everything that's happening within the sac that is your skin. That's everything going on in here. That is your metabolism. Now, granted, certain parts are way more important and energy consuming than others, but every single hair on your head, every twitch of your eye, every pump of your blood, that is all total your metabolism. Okay? It's very important to understand that. So people, again, it's like recovery and training. People want to isolate one part and talk about it, and it's just not possible. Yeah. So beginning there. Now we have a vague understanding that metabolism is everything our body's doing every minute of the day. That suddenly makes it much more encompassing and bigger. Now, a separate series of things they always say, oh, well, I run better on fat, or I run better on sugar, or I run better on protein, or... When cells, the actual smallest portion of life, not a person, not an organ, but the actual individual little cells that are smaller than most people's mind can conceive, made of parts even smaller, they only operate on one fuel. One kind, that's it. And it's neither fat, nor sugar, nor protein. It's something yet different. It's something called adenosine triphosphate, ATP.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what that means is no matter what you put in this hole below your nose, okay, no matter what goes in there, eventually it's turned into ATP, and that is what is metabolized. There is no other answer. Whether it's getting the ATP from fat or from protein or from sugar or from a combination of things, ultimately, when you contract a muscle, when you twitch your eye, or when silly shit comes out of your face, the energy that powered that was ATP and nothing else.
Right.
That is incredibly relevant. So now instead of saying, oh, my body runs better off fat, what you're actually saying is for some reason you believe your body is more efficient at breaking down fat into ATP than it is other substrates. And as you start to say sentences more like that and more complex and more relevant, they become more and more suspicious. That seems awfully suspicious. So that's kind of the overview of my metabolism does this or my metabolism does that. Keep in mind also, most people do not consider themselves an animal. Yeah. I am a biologist. So I look at everything in the lens of a biologist, sometimes to my detriment, but typically not. People are animals. Unfortunately, we do not live in the wild. And I say unfortunately because we can expose ourselves to all sorts of by very definition, unnatural things. We can get strawberries in the winter. We can get tropical fruit, off season. We can do all sorts of things that would never happen in nature. So that also is very relevant. But think about how nature works. You eat, just pick an animal. You're in the UK. A rabbit in the wild will come into being and eat all summer long, and it gorges itself on all these wonderful in-season things, and it gets fat.
Yeah.
Food makes it fat. Not carbohydrates, not protein, not whatever, just volume of food makes it fat. But why? Because fat is a high-density, easily preserved fuel source, so that when the cold comes, winter, change of season, food goes away, they're now carrying their food. Yeah. The body fat now becomes the food that they're not getting from the environment.
Okay.
That is how nature means to work. You're getting fat for a reason, because later there probably won't be any food, and you have to literally eat yourself, catabolize the fat you've stored. Yep. If you don't have that fat stored, you would catabolize muscle. One of those real important muscles happens to be your heart. You would probably die. You don't get through the winter. That's called starvation. So understanding the context that these systems developed over enormous periods of time, or if you're goofily religious-minded, that somebody made that way, regardless, but they are a certain way because that's what operates in nature successfully.
Right.
So once you have that kind of concept in place, it becomes very obvious that the food source is really not the issue nearly as much as the food volume. If you don't overeat all summer, you don't get fat, you starve in the winter. If you do overeat in the summer, you get fat, you metabolize the fat in the winter, you find yourself skinny again in the spring, and you start the cycle all over again. Sure. It works exactly the same for people. Because of the biochemistry, it is easier to store fat as fat than it is, say, protein. If you eat equal volumes of protein and fat in terms of calories, if you eat 500 calories of protein and 500 calories of fat, more of the fat can be stored as fat, simply because the conversion from fat to fat is very simple. The conversion from protein to fat is a little more complicated. It's like changing pounds to dollars. Yeah. There's a lot of complicated banking that has to go on before you actually get your dollars and then pay your bill. So you lose money in the banking process. And that applies, even worse with, carbohydrates and so on. But this idea that your body works better on one than the other is twofold. One, it's just people not interpreting the data properly, and also probably secondarily, they've gone out of their way to train themselves to do that. The body is capable of adapting to conditions. If you don't give yourself carbohydrates for a long period of time, your body will get better at dealing with the other substrates, simply because if it didn't, you would have fucking died. Yeah. Then what happens is they eat a bunch of carbohydrates because of whatever reason, and then they feel like hell. Well, if you take your car and do whatever I don't know anything about cars, but I know this is possible. If you take your car and you make the necessary changes to the fuel system to run it on alcohol, eventually you can get it to run on alcohol. You've done that now. But now if you swing by the filling station and put a bunch of gasoline in it, are you going to be shocked that it doesn't run that well?
Yeah, exactly.
You put the wrong damn fuel in it, or you've set the car up wrong for the fuel you're buying. Right. There has to be parity and continuity. Now, all of that aside, as far as what you can do and what people often do, at the end of the day, all mammalian biology is designed. Well, no, that's a lie. A vast proportion of mammalian biology is designed to operate on carbohydrates. There are a few random creatures that do, in fact, operate on protein. However, if you look at the under the hood stuff, they immediately turn that protein into a variety of carbohydrate via gluconeogenesis or deamination or some of these really complicated processes. Dogs, for instance, eat in nature almost exclusively protein, but they have a really clever metabolic shift that does something called deamination, where you take an amino acid and you strip carbon skeleton off of it, and what's left over is, ironically, sugar. They're really just eating carbohydrates out of meat. So,
right.
So by and large, when you're talking about where creatures get their energy in nature, it's almost exclusively carbohydrates.
Right.
You can accomplish all sorts of other things, yes, but it's a contrivance. It's done secondarily.
Mm. Mm. So what is it then when some people, for example, who are the same build, same gender, same age, same working environment, why is it that one person, for example, can quite easily consume maybe 600 grams of carbs a day and not actually gain weight, whereas another person can gain 600 grams of carbs a day but actually blow up like Winnie the Pooh?
Well, a lot of reasons. Beginning with, don't be duped by superficial similarities.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a really big, people just want to make connections where there are none. I hate this idea that we're all snowflakes and everybody has to figure out what works for them and they're special, because that's bullshit. Yeah. Everyone works exactly the same way under the hood. However, there are major differences. But they're differences that either took place on a genetic level or more likely have come about through behavioral changes.
Okay.
What have you eaten historically over time? Or what has your activity been historically over time? Or just because you find two people that are of roughly the same muscle mass, for instance, one might just naturally be that muscular, whereas the other might have had to bust their ass to accrue that muscle mass. Those would not be similar metabolisms, simply because one has contrived their physique and therefore their mass and their body mass to be a certain way, whereas the other is just basically operating at homeostasis. So there's a lot of these differences are superficial.
Right.
Secondly, just like in the analogy of automobiles, you can buy two cars right off the showroom, identical. You buy a his and hers. You buy exactly the same models. And you go out and drive them, and you find strangely that they get slightly different gas mileage. They're the same car. They were made in the same factory, possibly even on the same day. Why are they different? Little tiny differences that really don't matter much, but yet piled on top of one another. All the things that go into making a car, was there a million parts that goes into making a damn car, you get differences. A person is way more complicated than a car. So if you can get those kinds of differences in something as simple as an automobile, imagine what you can get in people. Exactly. Differences show up, very, very subtle differences do show up over time. Just the simple difference in carbohydrate sensitivity, insulin sensitivity, can affect your body weight retention from food eaten. And that, unfortunately, is your genetics, for sure. Volume of muscle mass is one of the biggest effectors. And then secondly is how much carbohydrates have you consistently eaten over time determines how much insulin has been exposed to the target tissue over time. So again, you've got a wide range of variables. And then there's one other thing that people don't mention, and I want to bring it up just because it'll make people mad. and it does. It really does. Again, I am a biologist, and I think things in the context of biology is what is the most important aspect of what is the most important thing any creature can do in nature?
Survive.
That is the number one thing. If you don't survive, then everything else is off the table. You can't reproduce. You can't make iPhones. You can't tweet. You can't whatever. The number one thing you can do is survive. And survival, he who eats the least, is most likely to survive. This idea that, I'm so burdened I have a slow metabolism. Actually, in the genetic lottery that is nature, you're the winner. Yeah. You have to spend less time foraging for food, and you could spend more time, making babies or making shelter or doing something else to progenate the species. Whereas I would have to spend every minute of my day walking around looking for food, or I would drop dead. Yeah. So, again, the problem to some degree is that we are a biological organism in a very non-biological environment.
Right.
We're now in a situation where you just walk in a room and open a magic door and it's full of food. And it's all, chilled and climate controlled and wonderful. That's never happened in the history of biology. This is very new. And it's not surprising that it's led to some pretty significant problems.
Yeah, hasn't it just? Yeah. Okay. So that's very interesting, actually, because it's always about, whereas we were taught in school survival of the fittest. Do you know what I mean? And now we can bring it up by saying survival of the slow metabolism. So
well, but again, that's actually very apropos, because in terms of biology, having a slow metabolism actually makes you more fit, in that you have a survival advantage over the person you're competing with. And again, that is what biology is all about, is competing. You compete on every level. You compete for space, environment. You compete for food. You compete for mates. You compete for every single aspect in nature. And so it is a matter of survival of the fittest. It's a matter of what is fit. It's just like exercise. People always want to talk about, especially CrossFit assholes. They're always, I'm so fit. I'm fit at what? To do what? What is your purpose? If you're fit to jump up and down and throw a ball at an imaginary spot on the wall, yes, you're TITS. You're the best ever. But if we're talking about something relevant, like running for your life or fending off a tiger or starting a fire, you're a fucking retard. So it's a matter of what are you fit at? What is your purpose, and what is your ability to accomplish that purpose? So again, in the case of biology, the purpose is survival. So the person with the lower metabolism has an advantage. They're more fit to that test.
Right, got you. I understand. That's really good.
But most people don't. That's the problem, is most people don't actually understand that.
Yeah, that's it. And a lot of people just want to kind of say, right, well, I'm going to go to the gym, I'm going to get big. Actually, this is a good point, talking about genetics as well, and talking about the drugs that you were bringing in, which is going to, kind of tie everything together here. With myself being a natural athlete, I actually work with, sorry, I'm going to bring that back because I wanted to get your point on that. I said athlete. Now, bodybuilders aren't athletes.
No, they're not.
Yeah. And I do agree with that 100%. Just give me your explanation for it, because a lot of people call themselves natural athletes and they're bodybuilders. And I'm like, dude, you're not an athlete. You're a bodybuilder. No. So please explain that.
No, but it's actually hard to explain. I usually wind up blurting that out at some off-kilter rant. But bodybuilders in general are the antithesis of athletes. They're typically not particularly fit in terms of, say, cardiovascular health. They don't typically have low pulses, low blood pressures. They certainly don't have low body weights. All things that are indicative. If you think in your mind of an athlete, you think of an MMA person or a gymnast or a track and field athlete. You're talking about somebody slender. They may be muscular, but they're thin, they're slender, they're slight. They have very low resting pulses. They have the ability to move, perform something, quote, athletic. All things that bodybuilders typically lack in spades. Bodybuilders typically are slow, lethargic, lazy creatures that accumulate body mass for no good reason other than it looks great in underwear. That is not the definition of an athlete.
Brilliant. So there you go. You've heard it from the evil genius himself. So please, bodybuilders out there, stop calling yourselves athletes. So, because I had the same argument, and I was like, you know what? I heard Broderick talk about this, so I must ask him on the podcast. So I'm very, very happy to discuss about that one.
Yeah, I mean, I have huge respect. I was a competitive bodybuilder. I took second in a Teenage Mr. America in 1990. I have the highest respect for bodybuilders, but it is just that, is the building of one's body, which really has nothing to do with athletics, or certainly athleticism. The average bodybuilder, moves, like a mongoloid with a limp. They don't move like an athlete. That's silliness.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So just very last thing then, Broderick. I wanted to talk about a natural person's genetic ceiling before they start delving. Before they start kind of delving into PEDs or performance enhancing drugs or muscle enhancing drugs, for example, is there a point where it is more beneficial for somebody to reach their genetic potential before putting in those drugs? Or is it realistically, if you want to get big and if you want to get on that Mr. Olympia stage bodybuilding wise, is it worth just kind of diving in and grabbing the drugs when you're young?
Well, you're asking so many questions all at once. I don't even know where to begin. Let me start with this, which I don't even think you actually asked, but it's relevant. Go on Instagram or Facebook or anywhere and look at bodybuilder X, Y, or Z, and all they'll say is, "Oh, I just want to reach my genetic potential." Yeah. And you look at them, and they're 4 times more muscular than any human being could possibly be in the absence of drugs. Okay.
Yeah.
The concept of genetic potential, you have to look at natural bodybuilding shows, which by and large nobody does because they're boring, because the people look pretty much like regular people. There's a reason for that, because genetically that's as big as you can fucking get. There are no 300-pound natural bodybuilders because people don't exist that big. A good friend of mine, Jared Feather, is an IFBB, or not IFBB, IFPA pro natural bodybuilder, and he is magnificent. His physique is extraordinary. He gets on stage at 185 or 90 pounds.
Yeah.
And it literally is awe-inspiring. He's sub 200 pounds. This idea that these 220, 240, 280-pound people want to reach their genetic potential is fucking stupid. They crossed their genetic potential probably about the time they started taking drugs.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, that's probably why they started taking drugs. Because they weren't growing anymore. That's how it works. So we live in what I call the pro wrestling world. And I don't say that as a besmirch. I actually have a deep connection with the world of professional wrestling. My grandfather was a pro wrestler. They've been in my family. And so I have a huge respect for pro wrestling, to the point where I actually respect it to the level of saying it did exactly what its directive was. It's made people lose track of reality. People watch wrestling and are like, that's amazing, and they're such great athletes. And I'm like, do you realize if any aspect of that was real, they'd all be dead the first week of work? Do you understand what a farce that is? Like, it's amazing that they could con you like that, but that's a farce. If a 300-pound man jumps on another 300-pound man from 20 feet, they both die. Yeah. You don't understand that. If 7-foot guy punches 5-foot guy in the face, the police come. It's not, you got to understand this. And that's where we're at with bodybuilding, is people page through these magazines and they see physiques and they just fail to realize that every single aspect of it, from publishing the magazine forward, is a farce. It's fake. There's no aspect that's real. All of the athletes are taking drugs. All of the women have had plastic surgery. None of the titties are real. It's just, you have to understand that. And I don't think that makes it any less. It just makes it an entirely different thing. When you actually clear your mind and go to a real, natural sporting event, it's like watching high school athletics. It's a whole fucking different thing. It's a lot slower, a lot smaller, a lot more, dare I use the word, natural. Nothing wrong with it, but it's a whole different thing. It's like the analogy in this country, I don't know about there, but in this country, everybody's a fucking car nut. I am not. I don't like or know anything about cars, but it'd be like going to see a professional car race, and then everyone showed up in the family station wagon. Yeah. It wouldn't be the same race. It just wouldn't. They'd still be great drivers, and there'd probably still be some excitement, but it would literally take place at 1/3 of the speed. Yeah. That's the difference. So, the whole drugs in sports, I don't even take the time to untwine them, because to me, sports are drugs. We live in an era where no one remembers a time before drugs. Yeah. I don't believe that exists. There are real, like I said, my good friend Jared is a natural bodybuilder, but in reality, it's such an incredibly small demographic of people that actually take the time to compete, that have never used drugs. It's such at least in this country, such a small demographic that I really don't even mention it. And quite honestly, they don't even enter my thoughts, to be honest.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Awesome.
it's just what it is. But you did in that giant question, ask a question that I can respond to is, quote, when is it time to take drugs? There's two answers there. One is based on science, and one is based on what I try to base everything on, which is just simple practical application. If you can make progress without drugs, then you, by definition, don't need them. But if you're at a point where progress is at a premium, then one of the major variables you can employ to generate new progress is drugs.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that. It's a matter of, like I said about putting cardio in the most apropos place in your day, is drugs should fit at the most apropos place in your career. When can you do it without? Okay, then you don't need them. Can you do it without? No. Okay, now you need them. It's pretty much that simple.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, the sciencey answer is drugs work. They were invented by very smart people, and they work really well. So at any point you choose to take them for whatever reason, your brain often circumvents necessity and reason and lots of things. Any point when you choose to do that, they'll work like magic. That's what they do. So you've got two different answers there is whenever you take them, they'll do what they do, but in reality, you only need them when other means don't work anymore.
Right. Okay. So it's more about getting the most out of the least until you're not getting the most out of the least anymore.
Exactly. Why would you not do it that way? Who wants to pay $500 for an item that they can buy for $100? That's just fucking stupid.
Yeah.
But, over time, that $500 item starts to cost $600. Now you've got a problem. So it's just that simple. You do that when it's time to do that, or you reevaluate your life and your priorities, and you choose not to even do the activity anymore, which I know a lot of people do. I've coached more than a few people that as they've approached their true genetic limit, when a male gets up around 200 pounds lean and they're finding it, they're training an entire year to gain a kilogram or less, then they start to really think about, do I want to risk my health and spend hundreds of dollars on drugs, or do I just want to be a homebody and just, feel good and not kill myself anymore? And an enormous amount of them fall off into that category. There's very few people like myself, and I'm forthright about this, that, literally take drugs in their teenage years, and continue through into their 40s, which I have done. But the difference is, and I do say this in honesty, and I don't really know if there's any value in me saying it, but the difference is I knew literally from embryonic age that this is what I was going to do. There was no debate. At about 7 years old, I was absolutely 100% committed. I am going to be a muscle guy. That's what I'm going to do. And I harangued my parents from age 7 to age 10 to even let me lift weights. And from that moment forward, it's been horribly obvious to everyone in my sphere that this is what I do. There's no options. So there was a level of commitment and certainty in my case that makes that a little less odd of a decision. I was taking drugs at age 17, knowing I have to reach a certain point, by the time I'm 40. It wasn't a concept of, oh, here I am 40, now do I want to take drugs? It was an entirely different arrangement for me.
Yeah,
but it was like I said, it was a very rare case, and most of the time you're not communicating with people like me, so I don't think it really, it resonates with anyone listening, but just to say it's fair.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's cool. I appreciate you answering that. A lot of people don't like talking about using drugs or cycling drugs or anything else, so I do appreciate you having a chat about that. So we're just about up on time now, Broderick, because we've been having a great chat for over an hour, which is quite cool. So just before we go, what is the one bit of advice that you can give all of my listeners out there, whether they be male, female, natural, assisted? What is it that you'd like to kind of leave them on?
Well, I kind of in the back of my head as we've been talking, I've been thinking about this, and I have to confess that your unique femaleness, and I keep coming back to that, I just don't know anybody else doing what you're doing of the gender you are and doing it the way you're doing it. So first I want to respond to your femaleness, and that is, I have a lot of experience with women athletes, and not just experience, but also success. I will first address them and you in saying that it may not be the most socially acceptable mindset, but as a female, the most valuable thing you can develop is your physical prowess, your muscle mass, and your ability to use it. It will make you more effective and efficient as a living creature, and it will empower you in ways that you're not yet aware. I've seen it over and over. I've seen it my own wife. The stronger and leaner she got, just the better she felt. And quite honestly, I don't know why she stays with me at this point, because she's moved well beyond me in every way, shape, and form. And I believe that is within the capability of every one of your listeners, particularly the female. So I really will emphasize that, not just don't fear the bar, but don't fear success with the bar. Get stronger and exploit that. You cannot steer you wrong. And the other thing I will emphasize to women is, in the rare instance, and this is exceedingly rare, that you actually get ever so slightly more muscular than you want to be, it's as easy to get rid of as an extra $1 in your pocket. Just take a week off and it goes away. Muscle is hard to come by and even harder to retain. So even if you overshoot the mark, take a week off, have an extra biscuit, and pick it up next week. It'll be fine. So that's for them. For everyone else, the best advice I can offer you is think. Just think. Just use your brain. I know it's not a muscle, but it needs exercise too. Think. Some of this stuff, when you just say it out loud, even if you're just talking to yourself, when you say it out loud, it sounds as fucking stupid as it really is. Just think and listen. It's not that hard. It really isn't.
I love that. Absolutely love that. And especially the fact about saying, in the very, very rare instance that women are going to get too big and too bulky. I have been trying for about 3 years to get big, and I'm still trying.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. You go to a natural bodybuilding show and you'll meet a scad of people that have been trying to get too big for a decade and none of them have pulled it off. What's the odds that you're really going to be that one?
Yeah.
Yes, she really exists out there somewhere, but boy, she's a rare flower. It's not a concern for the masses.
No, absolutely. That's fantastic. Well, I tell you what, guys, thank you ever so much for tuning in and listening to myself and Broderick. I will put all of his links, so make sure that you follow him, and hopefully I will catch up with you again very, very soon, Broderick. Again, so many thanks for your time. I've really had a blast today on it, and I'll send you a message, and hopefully we can catch up again, maybe just before I'm going to go on stage. Outstanding. I would love that. That would be wonderful. I enjoy this greatly. I've enjoyed this show, and I enjoy just connecting with people and seeing how and where they go and how they get there. It's always very interesting to me. So that would be exciting. Excellent stuff. All right then, guys, that's it from me. That's it from Broderick. Thank you for tuning in, and I will speak to you all next week. Thank you.